The first step is to start with a bunch of 6-inch squares. You can really use any size. The larger the square, then the larger the finished square will be. You do not have to have precise measurements. I have stacked them into stacks of 8. So this is going to be based on a rail fence, which is sometimes 3, sometimes 4 strips of fabric that are sewn together. Typically, it's the same 4 fabrics. There's 4 different ones in a block, but then that same block is repeated over and over. This is going to be much more random and fun. And also, you don't have to cut straight lines, but we are going to cut twice on our stack. So I have my stack. I pressed all these together, and I'm just going to randomly make a slice on a slight angle. And then I'm going to come over here and make another slice, approximating a 1/3-ish across. All right, there we have it. So I'm going to take the first fabric and I'm going to move that to the bottom of the stack. Then I'm going to take 2 fabrics and move those to the bottom of the stack. And now I have 8 blocks to sew together. I pressed the first set of blocks, and now I'm going to repeat the process for the remaining 4 sets. Okay, all my sets are cut. I'm going to take each to the sewing machine, sew those up, give them a press, and then we're going to come back and trim. So now that we have sewn our strips, they are now more rectangular than they are square, and that's okay. We're going to square them up, and that gives you plenty of room to maneuver to make the square. So you can position it up or down. The trick though is that you have to figure out the narrowest size that you have of your cuts. So I've gone through and looked at several of them. So I thought at first I might be able to get 5 inches, because when I measure this square, it is just a teeny bit over 5 inches. But I found some others that were a little bit narrower, and so currently it looks like 4 3/4 is going to be the way to go. And yes, I know, that's a funky size. Who cuts a square to be 4 3/4 inches? You can cut it smaller. You could do it 4 1/2, so you'd have a finished 4-inch. At this point, my finished square will be 4 1/4. It's just going to be a little wall hanging, so I don't really care. So to trim these down, I am just going to smooth one edge by giving that a good cut. And that's going to be the starting point. Flip that around. measure out my 4 3/4. Trim that edge. And now I'm going to finish squaring it up. So using one of my cut edges as a guide along the ruler, I'm just going to go ahead, trim that piece, and then likewise I can flip it around and trim it to 4 3/4. Now I've marked my ruler where that is to make it a little faster to find that 4 3/4. And now I have a new square. So I'm going to continue doing that for all of these, and we'll meet back here. If I have a nice straight side, which most of them do, then I can simply use that as my straight edge and not have to trim both sides. That first one I cut is a little wonky on actually both sides. At this point, I haven't come across any that would have to be narrower than the 4 3/4 inches. But if I did, because I already have a nice stack of ones that work at 4 3/4, I would just toss that aside. Remember, we did make some extra blocks just in case there's any that fall outside of the parameters that we're setting. So here is the stack of cut blocks. Again, mine turned out to be 4 3/4 inches. Your mileage may vary. You may be able to get 5-inch blocks. And it of course depends on the size of the squares that you started with before you slice them and sewed them back together. Because these were in the order that I sewed them, you can see that if I pick up these first 3, they share several fabrics in common, and I would like those to be more dispersed throughout the quilt. So I'm going to just kind of mix them up. And now I'm going to start laying things out. Now at this point, I don't have my design wall set up, so I'm going to be laying them out here. And I know the angle's a little weird, but at least you'll get an idea. As I arrange them, I am turning them 90 degrees so that I have vertical and then horizontal, vertical and then horizontal. And at this point, I am just trying to make it random. I still have plenty more squares that I can add on to this, but this gives me a starting point to be able to swap things in and out, and then I can continue to make it as large as I want. So each finished block is going to be just over 4 inches, about 4 1/4, which will make this about 17 inches wide if it's for 4 blocks. And then I can make it however long. The real fun part is just playing around to try to get a certain effect. Another great tip is once you have a layout, take a picture of it and look at it through a couple of different filters, including a grayscale filter so that you can really see the lights and darks if that is an important factor. But you'll often notice things that you won't see by standing over it, like that I have 2 of these very close to each other. All right, let's see how that looks. Here is the first iteration of the layout. And the first thing that I noticed is it has a lot of lights. You can see when I apply the grayscale filter that the concentration of the lights is off. And there's a few darks, but not enough, so I need to rearrange. Here is another attempt at a layout. I removed some of the squares that had the light fabric in them and redistributed some of the squares that were left. This is a much better balance between the darks and the lights. They're distributed much more evenly. And here is the final layout, which I think is 1 block different than the previous one, where I swapped out a block that had the dark green squiggle stripe on the far right. First, I began by sewing the blocks into rows. And then I sewed the rows together. And here's the finished quilt top. It's just a little wall hanging. I'm very pleased with the outcome. And how I'm going to quilt it, well, that's for another video. But I hope you enjoyed learning how to make a random rail fence. If you did, I'd love it if you would like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, I'm Stacy. Keep quilting.